Shattering Red, Chapter 5. The Right Vintage. They kept up their pace of a gentle jog for what felt like hours, but Faust assured her it had only been an hour with a gesture towards the sun in the sky and a glance towards a device on his arm that he had built as a kid. It was constructed from an old scavenged watch and an even older compass. Vita had always hated the grubby-looking trinket he had always worn on his right wrist, but it was currently the only thing pointing them in the direction of somewhere with people, supposedly. "I think we can slow down for a bit and take a break, and maybe talk about our action plan?" Faust huffed out, slowing to a walk. "You mean to tell me that there is more to this plan than just running through the woods until we hit someplace with people or run into something that wants to eat us?" Vita's anxiety ran her mouth before her brain could even catch up to what she had said. Her own eyebrows disappeared beneath her thick bangs as she realized how snippy she had sounded. "Sorry," she added lamely. Faust clapped her on the back a little harder than he meant to. "I think you're allowed," he said, then leaned his back onto a nearby tree. "I also think we need to hire a professional, if you plan on living any kind of normal life back in Aphthonia." He watched her face as she let that information really settle over her. Her hands balled into fists as she stomped around in frustration. "What's your biggest anger at the moment?" Faust questioned gently. "Who gave him the right?" She bellowed and kicked a nearby stump, which consumed her foot on impact, nearly toppling her over. "I was just going to work. What the actual fuck?" Faust caught her and set her on the log, her hands massaging her forehead in a way that concealed her face. "No one did. Do we need to have a moment about fairness?" He sat next to her. She deflated a little. Vita was close to 30 years old, and yet, in this instant, she felt almost as dumb as an over-emotional teenager. Her father there to try and help regulate her feelings. As much as she needed him, it did nothing to help her mood. If so, you may want to hold your breath, tighten up, and harness that anger for later, when you need it most. That response was not one she was expecting. "What?" Her emotional overflow building like a tidal wave, growing but still picking up on bits of flotsam in its wake, she asked bemusedly. That piece of debris, so-called fairness, clunked about the inside of her noggin for a good minute before the wave paused, hoping for the idea to expand further. "There is going to be a long road ahead, depending on what you choose. Saving that anger for the right moment might be the best thing you can do," Faust responded. "What kind of right moment am I saving up for?" The roar in her ears warbled out the nature that sounded around them. "I cannot personally tell you that, but I can say you will know it when it comes to you, and it will be worth it to hold off until then," he stated. Then he noticed how far out to sea she was by how glossed over her eyes were. "I have some techniques to help with that, though, if you're open to them." He drummed on his knees and tried not to put any pressure on the issue. "Do you want to talk about who Talbot is, his agenda, and what he has to do, or what we're going to do, or do you just want me to take over and we can just continue to walk for a bit, and then talk later?" She closed her eyes and took a moment to really consider what she could tolerate at the moment. Everything had changed over nothing in her mind, and yet, for someone else, a sentence she read somewhere, or just existing in her capacity with the doctor, was enough for them to want to squash her reality. It was hard to imagine that anything she had come across could be that important to someone, and the fact that they had the ability to act on it was terrifying. The nature that protected them was like a strange echo of that power. "I don't think putting off conversations is a smart move," she managed to say. She clamped her hands around each other in her lap, trying to figure out what to do with the excess noise in her head. Faust grabbed her hands tightly with one of his, then used the same hand to tap her on the chin before standing up and stretching. "I always knew you were smart. I don't think you would have made it this far if you weren't, though." He gestured at their resting spot as if that should be a victory. "Forgive me for lack of celebration," she grumbled at his compliment. He rolled his eyes. "You're going to need to find a new source of motivation and redefine your desires if you plan on making it too much further, though," he chided, swinging an arm around his chest and pulling it tight as he added, "If you can learn to foster calm, you'll be fine. I think redefining what you need out of life right now and focusing on the good for what you are doing for yourself and perhaps the good of others might help." She blew a raspberry in his direction, then started picking through her bag to see if there was a snack that could make her feel a smidgen better. She found some cheese and crackers in a small, clear glass flask filled with vodka. She pulled out both in the small bag of pebbles that represented so much she had already lost. "This really isn't a good time." Faust tossed his hands up in response as Vita took a shot of the liquid that burned the back of her throat. She then offered it to the man, who waved away the offering. "As far as I'm concerned, there has never been a more appropriate time." She took another quaff before returning the drink to her bag with a single hiccup. "Now it seems as if you have put together some information. I have not. Or you know something I probably don't. Or you have ideas on how to move forward. All I have is an urge to hit things, which won't help me, but would likely injure me." She pointed to the foot that still smarted from getting stuck in the log, "and a headache from too much going on in a day. I don't really know what to do at this point, aside from listen to what genius plot you came up with while I slept." She crossed her arms. "Okay." Faust smiled at her attitude. He would rather see her brashness than her giving up. He widened his stance and reached for his toes. "The first executable plan is the obvious and most likely the non-option, but I'll say it so it's blatantly understood." Vita nodded, accepting he was just about to spell out the circumstance she already thought she understood. "We go back to the city. Talbot finds you and kills you. You manage to hide for a bit, but the system is strong, and he has resources you don't. Eventually, he wins. Not just getting you, but also me, because I am involved." That last bit stung emotionally. She had not fully let the implications of his joining her sink in until that moment. She felt less like the wave and more like the unwitting passenger on some decrepit raft. Vita was just beginning to understand the depth of the reconstruction required. "Let's avoid that," she replied darkly. "I didn't figure that would do." He stood up and reached for his awful compass watch, touching a hidden release on the clunky casing that opened the face. Vita's jaw dropped. The whole time she had known him, he had worn the ugly memento, but she never knew the girth of the watch served as more than just fashion. Or, as Faust had always explained when she was younger, the weight of the casing alone was a weapon with enough force. Inside the hidden compartment was a carefully folded, very worn piece of paper. He brought it out and carefully unfolded a colorful page that displayed a rough outline that she could only assume was their continent, something neither she nor any citizen should know. According to their histories, there weren't enough surviving people to know what the world looked like now. "Close your mouth. I've told you on way more occasions than I care to bring up that I had an interesting past." He was using his knee as a surface to smooth the paper. "It's not like I have personally confirmed everything on this map is true either. I met others and drew based off their collected knowledge. It's about 25 years untouched. Things could be way off." He smiled, knowing he could still surprise her out here. "Why do you even have something like that?" The question sounded more like a statement as she got completely lost in the entirety of their possible world. Faust held the map up, and she almost tore it with how quickly she yanked it from him. "I was a youth once. I did things. And please be careful with that. There isn't another object like that I know of, and we would be shit out of luck if we lost it." He was making grasping hands at his priceless treasure, but let her look over it, his own mind astonished by how quickly her attention consumed that information, ditching her own grief for the briefest of moments for untold discovery. Her eyes traced the light blue veins of the closest river, and then noted the numerous black dots spaced unevenly across the map. Some of the dots had names. As she was inspecting the paper, a finger landed with a gentle tap next to one of the dots across the page. "This is the first place I think we should go. I have been there, and I know what kind of greeting we can expect. The people of Cedalus are more accommodating than most," he tested, sprinkling in his current plan to see if she would bite. "First place? How far are we planning to go, and why?" She had backtracked from his finger to see where Aphtonia's marker was placed. It was west from where they were headed. It looked like the river that was on top of the horizon would take them directly to that first dot. She watched as he tapped farther inland and west of Cedalus, in an area that left the lush green valleys and became a tan blot with an unnamed dot. Faust took out a pen and scribbled in the name Interim. I think we should be able to find a person who can rewrite your identity here. The Entoma was indoctrinated into Interim differently, but if we can find the right person and convince them to help us out, we might be able to come back and have you set up a whole new life, unless you wanted to stay out here? I doubt it, though. It doesn't seem favorable after growing up in a place like Aphthonia. He gave a small, firm smile that instilled a new type of confidence in her. She had sent him a message, and he had dropped his whole life for her. Again. This time was much different. No one had died. Yet. Neither Vita nor Faust had living relatives left. The closest thing they had was each other, and they were both here. Thank you. Vita didn't bother to expand on the whole thought, but stared deep into Faust's eyes, knowing that he knew what she meant. How about we keep walking and talking? He led them forward through the dense patchwork of trees, and they spoke plainly about fears of what might possibly come, while they were also watching the world around them carefully. The farther they got, the fewer blackened trees they saw. One tree caught both their attention. New greenery they had not seen before was working over the base of one of the blackened pines. It seemed to be the only one of its kind, fixed to a branch about 10 feet up and dangling with natural buckets. The most off-putting part were the tendrils that secured it to the tree. They resembled something like an octopus's arm, and the stalks that held the buckets swayed where they were walking, going as far as the end of the branch before lashing out like it was trying to bite them. It was a biting plant with outward intelligence, not fast enough to catch them, but there were clearly a few squirrels that were not so lucky. Little silhouettes in black were contained in some of the immobile closed pitchers. A few hours from the strange plant, the sun was just beginning to wane when they had their second mellow encounter with one of nature's oddities. Vita was concerned they would have to trek through the forest all night and was about to voice her concern, but right as she opened her mouth, Faust held a hand out backward to stop and silence her. He had instinctively crouched down low, but Vita didn't think anything covered their visibility from the massive green and gold lion watching them as it lazily licked a bloody paw from a tree branch. Above it, spread about and on angles, was a goat that was clearly having a worse day than either of them. He looks comfortable. I bet if we walk by and make no sudden movements, we will be fine, Faust whispered back to her. Stay away from the tree and angle off that direction down the hill. He pointed to their ideal path. If it comes after us, make yourself as big as you can and run. And they moved on. Vita's eyes couldn't help but focus on the majestic being that could end them in one pounce. Her heart pounded like a dropped maraca to see the red stain of the blood on the bark and hear the burbling from the mangled corpse. The cat yawned, its crimson maw making an audible chopping noise as it shut. It re-examined its masterpiece, choosing to nibble off a drumstick. It then watched from between its front paws as they left it to its own devices. She could have sworn it looked like there was a scar over its left eye. It looked a pale, milky white, but they were moving so quickly, and it was such a distance she couldn't quite tell. She didn't want to make full eye contact either. To challenge nature like that seemed foolish. But for a moment it felt as if that was what the beast wanted. Not that either of them gave in. They didn't speak until they had put a palpable distance between themselves and the ruler of the Dominion. Other than those 2 heart-racing moments, their path had been a relatively easy one, with nothing more than trees, strange herd beasts, and harmless little fluffies that ran by. The moon was just visible in the darkling sky when Faust readjusted their path a skosh again, following the compass on his arm. The trees had become spotty at this point. There were intermittent hills and small lakes that dotted the area. "We're getting near," Faust announced. "I recognize this area." There was a new spring to his step as they picked up their pace, excitedly moving forward towards civilization. Spending time in the wilderness was a great way to make a person appreciate the company of other humans. At this rate, we will get there just in time for the evening meal. "What should I expect to see in this city?" Vita inquired. Oh, this is your standard wild town. They're a farming community, very family conscious, and big on ritual. They keep very basic technologies and do most things by manual labor. They keep very strict to the laws of the land. This will be an interesting experience, she stated, not knowing what to expect at all and trying to fight back her anxieties. She had never seen pictures of a wild town and, of course, had never been to one. There had been artist renditions with lesson plans. She wondered if the people all lived in ramshackle huts and wore clothing patched together from whatever material was available. She didn't have to wonder too long, however. They were a little way past one of the nearby lakes when two medium-sized brown animals came rushing towards them and backed them up against a tree. The animals yicked and chittered loudly, back and forth at each other. Vita was terrified of what they would do, but Faust laughed and held out a fist for their long noses to sniff, which they did enthusiastically. They lifted up little hand-like paws and reached up towards Faust. He put his hand flat, and one of the critters grabbed it, put it on its head, indicating that he should pet it. The other snuffled towards Vita. She was so focused on the animal, she missed Faust's easy introduction. "Hold your hand out," Faust said calmly. She was holding her hands close to her chest and backing up. "I don't want to," she replied shakily. The little beast was trilling up at her and putting its front paws on her knees, trying to get close to her face. "Seriously, it won't hurt you. Let it investigate." With caution, she untucked one of her hands from under her chin and approached the beast's face with a flat hand. It snuffled again and licked her hand, then held her hand with both paws and flipped it over. Once it was done investigating her limb, it looked up and squinted at her face. It must have seen something because its ridiculously long tongue darted from its mouth and smacked her in the forehead. She jumped and yelped, and the creature jumped back too with a loud yick, but was quickly resolved to chase her around. A laugh bolted out from behind a tree some distance away, and a man revealed himself. He was carrying a rifle and had it aimed at them. "Twyla, Digit," he commanded, and the two little animals went dashing back to their master. "What's the matter? Never met an anteater fox afore?" The man yelled, peeking out from some undergrowth. "I have. She hasn't." Faust had his hands up in the air and motioned towards Vita. He squinted and muttered to himself for a moment. "I have been to your country before. Granted, it's been more than a few years. Is that you, Gerald?" "Depends. Who's asking?" The man spit on the ground. "You old shit, it's me, Faust. Remember me?" The man put the rifle down and gave them one really good once-over, then smiled. "I'll be damned. What the hell did you bring a slicker here for?" As he waited for a response, the other man smacked his lips like he had long been missing a few teeth. "It's a long story," Faust said, and moved quickly towards his friend. "You and the townspeople in for a good weave?" Vita was confused, but trailed after the two. Faust hastened up to Gerald, and they both started walking towards town. Faust slapped him on the back in friendly greeting. The anteater foxes trotted behind on either side of Vita. On occasion, their tongues would flick up and remove a bug off her. "You're going to make me wait for the story? Or give me the beans?" He shook his head and laughed. "I'm sure there's a nice wine that could go with some spilled beans." Faust's thick, dark gray, well-defined brows waggled hopefully and were met with thoughtful pause. "I think we may have a bottle from the last summer you were last here tucked away somewhere. If memory serves, you helped make the batch. Maybe it's time to air it out." Gerald's nose crinkled, and he grimaced at Faust. "You could use with some airing out. Or a bath." He waved Faust a few steps back with a laugh. "After we eat and find a place to stay, that will be the priority." They took a few steps back before Faust added, "It seems the boundary has been expanded for you to be out so far." "You remember Thurston's big clutch?" Both men nodded. "They are responsible for most of the growth. They are all partnered up with children of their own now." The two old men chattered like old friends, swapping gossip about the different cities like kids around a campfire. Vita watched as the landscape continued to change. There were clearly areas that had been touched by humans all around, but these fields were plainly outlying, mostly ignored and left to go wild. The two men rounded a hill, and when they all came over it, Vita let out a small gasp. She had not expected Backwood Hicks to live in such a beautiful way. It felt as though she had wandered into a mystical, fresh green valley of lore. There were sweeping hills of farmland nestled underneath breathtaking mountains, tucked between patches of trees. These people had clearly worked hard to make sure what they did not ruin the beauty of the countryside around them, and instead had incorporated the natural flow of life into their own dwellings and culture. Houses were mostly made of stones, mixed lightly with lumber. Some were built into hillsides, with grassy earthen roofs. There were orchards off to the north end of the city, and, except for a few common areas, it looked like the majority of the town was left for various types of farming. The sun had turned into a blistering orange as it gave its final show for the day, casting a funny glazed look over the village. "You've never been too far from your own landscape, have ya?" Jared jibed. She shook her head, taking everything in. The articles she had read made the country folk seem small and rather uneducated, but that was clearly not the case. This was a community of people who worked to help each other out as a whole. People and animals were bustling about together, taking care of their daily duties. The animals that were used here were nothing like the traditional animals that were kept for vertical farming. It was required for children to tour the vertical farms in the city to understand how food was sustained in their society. There was nothing natural about it, and no person had to work with food unless it was a hobby. These people took a completely different approach and went back to the soil. In vertical farming, the old animal species were preserved from before the nuclear attacks and environmental disasters, and little had changed in regards to livestock. It seemed the wilds had changed most of the animals. Vita was at a loss for how to identify most of the beasts around her, and honestly did not know how many people sustained themselves on such archaic methods. Vertical farming took such a large amount of space and energy, but it kept food safe from the elements. These people left their fate up to the environment. It seemed barbaric. Aphthonia had dabbled and tried in new, innovative animal husbandry to accommodate travel due to vehicles being banned. But the numerous hybrid species created were nothing like the beasts that trundled by. Extremely large, blonde, and hairy, the main creature being herded by the small anteater foxes and followed by a few people seemed to be possibly morphed from a bovine-type animal. There was a pond nearby that housed many strange, fat, long-legged green and blue waterfowl. One of them picked up a large pink amphibian from the water and swallowed it. Before she could take in anything more, Jared steered them towards a large stone building. Men and women were lined up out front, smoking something that had a sickly sweet odor. They all smiled and waved at the newcomers. Jared opened the door, and Twyla and Digit led the way into what was a busy common dining hall. "If you're hungry, supper is just starting. Go grab a tray, head up to the window, and the servers will give you what you need. There is water and other drinks over that way, and I normally sit over there." He motioned around the room as he talked. "The latrine, if needed, is in the small building you saw next to the pond. I'll meet up in a moment. I gotta go discuss some business and pull that bottle." He slapped Faust on the shoulder and tottered off towards a busy table not too far from them. "We better get food quickly," Faust said, pushing her towards the sustenance window. "I'm not arguing, but why so quickly?" Vita responded, dully watching as a few children went running by and yelling at each other with glee. "This is a small town of a few thousand people. Most people know each other, and visitors are rare. We will cause a bit of a ruckus." He had already grabbed a tray and was pointing to what he wanted. "Oh, and be sure to try the yellow stuff. You'll love it." Vita looked back to where Jared was, and sure enough, he was pointing in their direction, and it looked as though he was letting everyone know he had found these two wandering in the forest. She pointed at the things that she recognized food-wise, and the lady behind the counter dolloped it out on her plate. A man snuck up behind Faust and smacked him on the back. Vita was catching on that this was a form of greeting in these parts. "Is this your wife, you scoundrel?" the man asked. Faust clearly recognized the man because he turned and smiled and shook his hand. "Adopted daughter, more like?" Faust flushed as he spoke, just loud enough for his voice to carry. Vita also went red. No one had ever made a comment like that before. She waved awkwardly at the small crowd they were being herded to by the man and sat down where people proffered. She kept quiet and let others do the talking. Now what brings you out to our neck of the woods? A man from the opposite side of the table asked, raising a hand. I'm Matt. Others around the table started announcing their names before letting anyone speak. My daughter here, Vita, has essentially been run out of town through no fault of her own. He took a bite of food and savored it for a moment. There is one government official there that is none too happy with her, and she hasn't even done anything. One day, she was a regular citizen, and the next, someone had marked her. So we left. The others at the table started to eyeball her. There was some trepidation, but for the most part, there was a sense of respect. All we're looking to do is lay low for a day and hopefully find some work in exchange for mounts and rations, and we can head over to our next destination a little faster and with less discomfort than what it took to get us here. He put another bite in his mouth and let the people talk. A group close to Faust's generation clamored for more details, and Faust was happy to supply answers with grand theatrics. Vita was quickly overwhelmed and let him take over. Soon their plates were taken away. A kind woman named Serna offered Vita some new clothes and a place for both of them to stay, and they were both led away from the hall and Jared for a good night's sleep before a promised day of hard labor. That's the end of Chapter 5 of Shattering Red. Thank you so much for listening so far. If you like what you heard, please be sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks so much.